Three, two, one. Welcome to the Dave the Dog Trainer podcast. Bonus episode because I didn't know we were filming an episode today, but guess what? We're filming an episode. So we are being joined today by Mariano of the Dog Trainers podcast. Brent is not able to be with us because he's traversing the world on vacation somewhere currently, hopefully enjoying his life. And Tyler Muto. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about an upcoming workshop that the Dog Trainers podcasts are going to be hosting with Tyler coming up here. So without further ado, welcome. Happy to have you guys on. Got the Buffalo Bills mug.
Got the Buffalo Bills mug always.
I
try to always use this mug when I'm filming just cause,
So people know where you're from and where your loyalty lies.
Yeah, exactly. The seminar coming up beginning of August, 1 through 3, I believe. I think it's gonna be pretty cool. It's the Art of Teaching 2.0. These guys did Art of Teaching 1.0. Was it a year ago, Mariano, or 2 years ago? When was that?
It was about a year and a half ago with Michael Ellis in, I want to say, early January.
Oh, yeah. That was right after we did our podcast because you guys were talking about it. Nice.
Right. Yeah.
How did that go? Good?
It went well. It went really well. I mean, and obviously with Michael Ellis on the ticket, it went perfectly well, right? It's funny because Brent and I were prepping so much because, of course, you do a seminar with Michael Ellis and you're like, you come ready, right?
Yeah.
And so we're like, should we make slideshows? And what do you think about this theme? Because slideshows have themes and stuff now and that theme. And then Mike shows up with like 4 pages stapled together.
Yeah.
And a pen that he uses to scribble extra notes and stuff on. And it was perfect anyway because he's Michael Ellis, right?
Yeah.
But it was great. It was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And how do you, so this is like kind of a number 2, right? This is a part 2, if you will, where you're bringing a different guest in, obviously Tyler here. What, are you hoping to see this be kind of like a continuation of that workshop or something totally different, or what's kind of your take on that?
I'd say a little of column A, a little of column B, because there was so much in that first workshop that we wanted to expand on, and just we found that we ran out of time. When you run a first of any type of seminar, you realize that things take either longer or not as long than you would have projected on paper, right? And so you always have the second opportunity to kind of refine it and make it better. But also, Tyler's a whole new person, brings a whole new set of skills to the table, and so we want to take things in a different direction kind of as well, right? Like in my mind, I'm a big movie nerd, and in my mind, I think of it like an anthology. Like it's one title, Art of Teaching, but one was with Mike, and it was kind of its own thing. And then this one's with Tyler, and it's going to be its own thing. And the next one will be its own thing. And I think that that's a cool way of keeping the information fresh, yet sticking to the core themes that are, that they kind of reoccur throughout things. And that's something that we try to touch on a lot in DTP, not to shameless plug, DTP, Dog Trainers Plug, is I'm a big fan of hearing different people's takes that all have different perspectives, but all tie into sort of fundamental truths that show up really often. I feel like me as an avid podcast listener, I'll hear 10 different people say 10 different stories and all touch on the same like 4 or 5 different elements and be like, oh, maybe these are just important for all kinds of walks of life. And that's one of the cool things about something like Art of Teaching is it's going to be different, but the important stuff is probably not going to change that much.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so obviously the art of teaching, the art of learning, right, is a very broad paint stroke kind of topic, right? So what types of things really are you excited to like dive specifically into in this workshop? Like, are you gearing this more towards, owners of dogs? Are you gearing this more towards trainers improving on how they're communicating with their clients? Is it more on them improving their skills with working with dogs? Is it, again, probably a little bit of all of the above? What are some of kind of your specific takeaways you want people to have from this? I guess that's a question for both you and Tyler.
Yeah, for sure. So let me give a brief answer, and then I'll let Tyler answer. So
sure.
My brief answer would be, in my mind, the art of learning, of being good at learning, of acquiring new skills, of taking notes, of memorizing things and recalling these important memorizations is a skill in itself that often dog trainers don't focus on as much as maybe they should. I think that any good dog trainer that's serious about their craft spends a ton of time getting better at dog training and learning more about hands-on technical dog skills all the time, which is good, of course, but not necessarily enough time on learning how to learn, learning how to teach, learning how other people learn, or even little things like, I'll kind of finish my answer with this, is one of the most enlightening things I've learned in the past few years was just finding out like the kind of the traditional avatar of our clients in America. Like the average, average like middle of the road American family that has a dog and, disposable income to spend on training their dog. They're really good at what they're good at for work and so forth. But on average, they'll read like a ninth grade reading level. They'll read maybe a book or two a year, and they're not dumb. They're not uneducated. They're not necessarily ignorant. Like they're just kind of in their lane, like most people are. And when I think in those terms, with no animosity, like that's fine. I'm like that too, honestly. Play my Xbox and work and just do my thing. That it reminds you, or at least it reminds me, there's nothing wrong with being simple, and there's nothing wrong with taking information and not trying to like impress everybody all the time with how much you know and all these fancy words. Just take this content, turn it into really simple context, and just give it to them, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that's just been super game changing for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with that. Go ahead, Tyler.
I was going to say, sort of at its core, at its simplest form, the seminar is primarily geared for professional dog trainers. And what we're trying to focus on is everything that goes into getting a really good outcome with that dog that doesn't fall under the category of dog training.
Yeah.
So, these days, pretty much all I do is work with professionals. I occasionally will take on a pet dog client. And what I found really surprising, especially over the past maybe 5 years of working with professionals, is how much knowledge and people are doing things that have been training dogs for 2 or 3 years that took me like 7 or 8 years probably. Like I think the access to knowledge out there about dog training is really abundant. I'm honestly really jealous when I meet some young dog trainers because I'm like, man, like you've only been doing this for 2 years. Like, my God, you're so much better than I was when I was doing it for 2 years.
Yeah.
But when people are really trying to move the needle and get better results, what I'm finding is while there's all that information out there and they're really accelerating in that aspect of their skill set, a lot of them haven't really learned about the human side of it and what goes into making sure that goes well. And so this is not just like, oh, how to speak clearly when you're presenting information. This is everything from when you first sign on that client, what information might be good for them to have sort of before even walking in the door that like preps them for that first session being where they're relaxed and comfortable and open to listening. How do you run that initial consultation to get the information that you need to make sure that you can plan out like a really customized and well-planned training plan, regardless of whether they're doing private lessons or board and train. And then of course on to okay, now you're in the lesson, you're working with this client. How do you take a skill, an individual skill, like a basic command, for instance, and break it down? And how are you going to present that information to the client? And so it's a 3-day event, and each of the 3 days kind of covers one of those 3 broad topics. So we have, the sort of like the pregame, right? How to bring that customer in, how to run that consultation and make sure you're getting the information that you need. You're also making them feel comfortable and kind of setting up for a good learning experience and a well-planned teaching experience. Mm-hmm. And then of course, okay, then how do you plan a program? Like I work with a lot of dog trainers that if they're doing a private lesson package, they kind of walk into each lesson either sort of winging it or kind of following a rote plan that's, basically the same for almost every dog until up to a certain point.
Yeah.
And they can actually get a lot more accomplished with a lot better results if they kind of think about that a little bit more, right? Not just wing it, but actually have a reason for teaching what you're teaching in each lesson and make sure that all of those reasons point you towards that end goal. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, that's basically the event. And I'm pretty excited about it because I've never done a seminar that literally this seminar is not about dogs. Like, we're not talking about dog behavior here. We're talking about how to nail it, whether you're doing board and trains, private lessons, or group classes, and how to make sure that you're outperforming your competition and getting really happy customers and not overworking yourself. Like, a lot of trainers actually end up doing more work because they're not actually planning. And so I'm like, you can get better results and have a happier customer and actually have less things that you're responsible for accomplishing if you just thought this through a little bit more.
Yeah.
So yeah, that part of it, that gets me pumped.
Yeah. Okay. So I might have missed all three. So you were kind of breaking down the 3 days and the 3.
Oh, did I skip?
Individual
Did I skip
topics.
one? So
I don't know. Yeah. It's
it's
more clearly outline those. Yeah. So you said
Evaluation.
pregame. Yeah.
Yeah. So evaluation, day 2 is like planning the program,
Got it.
right? And then day 3 is like you're executing it. You're in that lesson. And how do you teach? Like, take any skill, but how
I
do we
understand.
actually think about how we're going to teach that skill and make sure that we're doing it? Like we're making really good use of that lesson time.
Yeah.
A lot of dog trainers go overtime in their lessons, right? We want to make really good use of that lesson time.
Yeah, 100%. Is there one of those over the other? Obviously, I'm sure they're all important, but is there one of those over the other that you see that trainers are making the most mistakes within?
I mean, on my end, and this might be different for Mariano, on my end, I mean, I see it in all of them. I think a lot of dog trainers are pretty decent at the evaluation portion of it. Um, I think there's always improvements that can be made, but I think most trainers do pretty good there. Like people know what they want to know. But when we start talking about the planning and execution, you might start to actually think about what information you need a little bit differently, right? Once you start really thinking about how do I really tailor this lesson for each individual customer. So yeah, I think 2 and 3 are the ones where I see the most like trainers are missing the most generally.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think that assessing, and evaluating is probably the easiest to get right or to be very comprehensive with, just because it's by its nature, it's kind of a series of questions and answers. It's also easiest to replicate. You can kind of look into a trainer who you admire and be like, hey, can I see your evaluation form checklist type thing, right? But when it comes to planning, planning in itself is a teachable skill that even if on paper I kind of give you a plan until you make whatever adjustments you feel you need to make, a lot of people don't necessarily know how to do that. And when it comes to actually teaching, in my experience personally, that can be this sort of double-edged sword where someone teaches in such a way that I'm like, I totally get why this works for you. I just don't feel it would work for me, so I'm not going to do it. Or like, or I'm not going to do it in the manner that you do it. Or it works so well for you and I look up to you, so I end up kind of sounding like you by mistake and I didn't want to. And it comes across as strange or something like that, So I think for people, that's also just a matter of, some practicable, like learnable things to be sure, but also some experience to kind of find that middle ground of I want to sound like myself. I just want to sound like myself in a way that's organized and well thought out.
Yep, that makes complete sense. So I guess what might be an interesting thing to do here. So as you outlined these 3 things, like as you were talking them out loud, things were popping into my head as far as like stuff I see when I'm like mentoring younger trainers, or I see with like our competition and things like that, that fall within, like, I guess you can call it like mistakes within those 3 categories. I'm curious to just kind of give you guys my initial takes on some things I see and then hear like your guys' opinions on those things. I think that might be kind of interesting here.
Yeah, please.
I was actually very curious to hear, like, because I know that you do have other trainers that'll come and like shadow you and that work with you and stuff. And then obviously running the podcast, you talk to a lot of trainers.
Yeah.
I was actually curious to know what you're seeing as well.
Yeah. So, and it's funny because I'll tie this into literally we'll call it assessment that I did yesterday that highlights a lot of this stuff as well. Right. So as far as the pregame and the assessment, I think a lot of trainers, and it's funny you mentioned that's I don't want to say easiest of them, but the one that a lot of trainers tend to like not struggle with the most, which I would agree. But I think that's because, in my opinion, this might be a controversial take, I think people like overemphasize the importance of the evaluation and they treat it a little bit too much like just a way to like have a great sales pitch for their clients. You know what I mean? Like it's like one of those things where you get them in person, you could kind of sit down with them and like talk about their dog and talk about their goals, but like in the end of the day, you're trying to just be in front of them to like gain their trust to kind of sell them on a program. And I interestingly enough don't really do a lot of evaluations. The only time that I'll do an evaluation with clients is in circumstances where they may have done like a lot of training elsewhere, where I don't necessarily think that they need to like sign up for a complete program with us because the dog probably already knows a lot of the skills that they'll need, right? So I kind of want to evaluate like where they're at with their training, or if we're dealing with some type of like really extreme like aggression issue where there might be some like really serious limitations on how far the dog might get with it, right? Those are the circumstances where I will do like a formal in-person evaluation. But past that, an evaluation for me is, and I think you alluded to this, a way to just allow the client to ask questions, develop some trust in you and feel confident in spending their money with you, but not in a way where you're trying to like push them or sell them on something. So we do like phone consults with everybody. I'll usually spend like 20 to 30 minutes on the phone with each of our clients before they sign up for training and kind of get a feel for things. And then, most of the information that I'll actually need to know about the dog, I'm not really going to learn until I actually start working with them, right? Like as I start working with them, I'll kind of learn how they respond to different training methods, or, once we start like actually socializing them, like where they're going to get with those types of things. And then even then, it doesn't really change the program they're signed up within. It just kind of changes some of the things we do within the program. So I think the evaluation, I feel a lot of people just put a little bit too much weight in it, where most of your information you need gets to your pre-planning, which is just like the client's North Star, like where do they want to get with things. And, like you said, a lot of clients getting into the planning stage of things, they'll get a little bit too much of a cookie cutter approach, or they won't know what they're doing in each session and have zero plan with stuff, where I think there's a balance with it where like you don't want to get too rigid of having like a crazy in-depth plan of like this session we're going to do this session we're going to do this session we're going to do this. I think you need to be able to approach each lesson from the standpoint of like, I don't necessarily know exactly what I'm going to work on today. I need to see where the client's at with stuff, what they've been struggling with over the course of the last week, et cetera, et cetera. But it has to be guided by like a North Star. So I talk with trainers a lot about they have a really hard time finding the pain point that their client's hiring them for, right? Like,
yeah.
Client,
and
go ahead.
It's
Yeah.
like so interesting you say that, because that's actually like the very beginning
Yeah.
part like of all of this for us is before you can even plan, it's what is the goal here, right?
Want?
Like there's a huge emphasis around that.
Yeah.
What are we aiming for? Because I'm with you. I want to just deconstruct from there. And what we're after here is like the 80-20, right? So we don't want to go into like this rigid detail. What's the like 20% of like planning that we're going to do that's really going to result in like 80% of having a very good outcome, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of it with all of this. The one thing I want to go back to though is when you're talking about the evaluation,
Sure.
right? And I agree with you that there's a real distinction between evaluating the situation and doing a sales call.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of trainers where we focus on like some trainers actually don't know how to do sales, and so they struggle there. Like what is there, like whether it's through a phone call or an email, it depends on your business and where you're at. That's a whole different conversation. And so what we're talking about here on day one is not in air quotes here for people who might just be listening, like not the evaluation. It is the process of evaluating. And that process doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing a formal sit down face-to-face evaluation. It starts with, for instance, the contact form. What questions do you even want to have on there?
Yeah.
What questions do you want to have your receptionist ask before you even get on the phone with them? If you do any kind of evaluation, what do you want to ask there? But like, for instance, for me in my business, when we were very busy, we didn't do any like pre-consultations. My office team signed people up for programs. Our first lesson was extra long. It was a 90-minute instead of a 1 hour. And so the first 15 to 30 minutes of that lesson is our opportunity to just like get to know the client. Hey, what are we trying to do here? Like, ask any deeper questions that our office staff didn't get. So that's actually like a first lesson. But then one thing that we also emphasize is that it is an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
So like you said, kind of back to your point where you were like, a lot of what you need to know, you're not going to be able to find out until you start working with the dog.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we also really dial in that process?
Yeah.
As we're working with dogs, what questions are we asking?
Yes.
When do we stop and think about, do we want to sort of, make an adjustment or reroute here?
Yeah.
Right. So it's not the evaluation, it's the process of evaluating. So like for me, like a lot of my evaluation was actually just like an intake form.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was really thoughtful about what questions I put on that form and why am I asking these questions?
Yeah.
And that's a huge part of it, right? So how thoughtful are you about that? Not you specifically, but sure. Trainers out there. And so it's not just a one-time, this is the evaluation. You've got 30 minutes, do it right? Yeah, it's sort of everything as we're gathering information. And that's like beginning to end of any time we work with a dog. That could be like for us, it was for board and trains. We'd get a dog in week one, and it was always like towards the end of week one, all of a sudden we're like, okay, we've got a few more questions we've got to ask the owner. Now that we've gotten to know the dog a little bit, we want to get some clarification on some things that they said happened at home, or just gather more info, or ask certain questions about the dog's behavior, maybe something that didn't come up in our previous conversations. So that's still part of evaluating,
Yeah.
is even that first week of a board and train, for instance.
And this is really actually, as we're talking this out loud, you even have me kind of thinking, because like I've always had this like aversion to like the pre-signing up evaluation, because it's always felt like everybody I know that does them, it feels like I said, that way to just like sell the client.
Well, it generally is a sales meeting. So we're calling it an evaluation, but not for everybody, but for a lot of dog trainers, and I work with a lot of dog trainers, for a lot of them, it is a sales call. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's a very valid business model and strategy that works well. I did it in the beginning of growing my business, right? I did the free evaluation, right? But it was really like, yes, I'm asking some questions. Yes, I'm getting to know the dog a little bit, but it's all of that is sort of still part of my process for signing this person up, right? There's like a demonstration of value, for instance, you would call it in like sales lingo, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but we need to distinguish the sales call from the process of evaluating. And by the way, part of that sales call might be a little bit of your evaluation process that began at the contact form and ends on the last time you see that dog.
Yeah, because like I'm thinking like in my sales, call it sales call or whatever, like when I'm doing my phone consultation, like what am I really evaluating? Like the only thing I'm really looking to evaluate prior to them committing to the program is like, frankly, is this a client that I want to work with or not? Because it's few and far in between, but like there are definitely clients that call where it's like you're talking to them and you could tell right off the rip, like, you know, they want to really steer exactly how the training process is done, or they might have like really strong aversions to certain tools or like things like that, where it's like you could talk to them and feel like, is this somebody that is like open to learning, right? Is this somebody that, you know, has an open mind about how their dog may be trained? And though they have an idea of how they want it done, they're still open to your expertise on things. Or you'll work with people who are just, you could tell they're just not going to mesh well with you, right? But past that point, to your credit, I guess you are still evaluating session one. You know what I mean? Dog comes in, it's like you are seeing how they respond to all those types of things, and that is going to dictate your plan that you create for the dog in the end, obviously. So regardless of where you're doing the evaluation in your process, that makes sense if there are still things that you're looking for to create that plan. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so like I said, the North Star thing though, I think trainers really struggle with finding that. You know, they get a little too hung up in how they want to train the dog and what they think owning this dog successfully should look like, as opposed to what the client really wants. Like one example I use all the time, and again, I think this is a bit of a controversial take, which again, I'm curious to hear your opinion on, is like, there's a lot of trainers out there that I'll see that like basically have like straight up will say like, hey, like, if you refuse to crate your dog, like I'm not going to work with you, right? And that's always one that I've used as a sticking point to kind of show the point of like, if a client is hiring you not for any type of like separation anxiety issues, maybe they have a dog that jumps on their guests when they come over, and there's ways to alleviate and solve that problem, and it's frankly a really good dog, and the dog's been out for 7 years out of the crate when they're not home and stuff like that. Like, why would I die on that hill of needing to get them to put the dog in a crate when they leave the house when there's no issues surrounding that? It's like, it's just something that I create in my head of this is what owning a dog should be, as opposed to what the client specifically wants, right? And that's just one of many examples. I mean, the others are like, okay, client's hiring you for, you know, whatever, leash reactivity issues, and you spend the whole first half of your program working like sit stays in your training facility, and you never like progress it to working outside, like in the environments that the dog, you know, obviously is going to need that type of training in. And it's like, obviously, if there's certain, you know, pre-work we have to do with dogs, obviously, before we address things head on. But, you know, a lot of times I think we get too hung up in all these things that are unrelated to the actual goal the client's hiring us for, you know?
100%, which is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that, you know, a lot of trainers actually make more work for themselves, right? I agree with you. I think a lot of trainers make much more work for themselves because, yes, there is some pre-work that has to be done, but it's not the same pre-work for every dog.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I love like that you brought up about how like, you know, people do these things like, you know, I've got to stick this dog in the crate, but like, have we stopped and just asked why? Like, why is it important for that dog to be in the crate? Is it, you know, is it really going to move the needle? Yeah. Is it really one of those things? I think a lot of dog trainers don't think about like, sort of like what I would call like capital efficiency, to use like a technical term here, but like, okay, maybe working those sit stays in the facility, like the impulse control that's built there does have a positive impact on the dog's reactivity out on the street.
Sure.
Okay. But how much of an impact?
Yeah.
And how much of an impact in relation to the time that was spent? And so the time you spend working with somebody, right? The time you spend in that lesson, like that's fixed, right? It's not infinite. You know what I mean? So we want to be careful about how we use it. We don't want to risk 30 minutes of our 1 hour lesson on something that's only going to move the needle 5% when we could have spent it on something that's going to move the needle 30%.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of dog trainers, they think anything that moves the needle is worth spending time on, but that's just simply not true because you don't have infinite time.
Yeah.
So what are the things that move the needle the most? Of course, there are some things that literally are completely unrelated, like don't move the needle at all.
Yeah.
But I also think we need to distinguish between like, what are my high probability, sort of low cost, high outcome tasks that I can focus on?
Yeah. And
That's
I think
what
one
we
you
want.
said like 80-20 principle. Like really you're looking at that. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, for sure for planning, that all begins with the North Star.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
100% that begins with you have to be always like we always put on our board and train kennels. We had like several little sheets that were there, like, how we can keep track of their training and stuff. But we always kept a sheet that had the owner's number one goal, like right there. Like it was like owner name, dog name. Why is this dog here?
Mm-hmm.
And we want you to like literally look at that every day. Why is this dog actually here?
Yeah.
Is what you're doing today with this dog, does it have to do with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Love that. And as far as the execution side of things, like a common problem that I feel like I see in that realm, and this again ties into, I did an assessment yesterday because it's a dog that's done extensive training elsewhere, and very, very human aggressive dog, like pretty gnarly dog. And, I go there, evaluate the situation, and they have this other trainer they've been working with where they've done like a board and train. They've done a one-on-one program. The dog goes to daycare and boarding with them all the time. And it's like, the trainer has an incredible relationship with this dog. Like they've been able to train this dog very, very, very effectively from the standpoint of the dog's safe with them. The dog is really reliable with their training with them. The dog's an angel anytime that trainer is around. And the client had reached out to us because they were like, I feel like this situation might be out of our trainer's wheelhouse as far as the difficulty of our dog. And I was like, I would actually push back on that. This trainer has proved they're capable of working with a dog like this. But the missing link that I see time and time again is the trainers are not good enough at predicting the mistakes the owner is going to encounter once the trainer is not present and teaching them exactly how to handle those things when they pop up, right? And that case in point example happened as I was coming in. They had no idea how to handle the dog's explosive behavior as I was coming into the house. And then they had no idea if they wanted to try to socialize this dog with another person or dog, how to handle it. And they had no idea how to truly enforce their walking because it's like the trainer had this association of when they're around, the dog just knew to behave, right? And I think from an execution standpoint, like that is just the absolute number one thing that trainers these days are struggling with is they get the dog incredible with them because they tend to do board and trains with these dogs and stuff like that. But then it's like the dog is great when the trainer's around, and then they never get to coach the client through like how to handle the situations as they pop up. And I think it feels like common sense if it's just a little bit of foresight of like, what are the things you needed to do when you encountered these scenarios and then prep the client for those things. But yeah, that's something I'm sure you're going to be getting into in this, but that I would say was the absolute number one thing I'm seeing from an execution standpoint of why dogs or owners are just not being successful with their dogs after seeing multiple other trainers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's sort of twofold, right? So on one level, because I do see it all the time, especially with board and trains, the trainer will be like, okay, but the dog's resource guarding, but he's not resource guarding with me.
Yeah.
Right? Like he's here, he's not doing it. But what I always tell them is, yes, but he's going to do it for the owner.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had to walk that owner through step by step how to rehabilitate it when it is happening, what is that going to look like? You should do it with the dog while the dog's here, so the dog's really familiar with every step of that process. And then you bring the owner in and you teach them how to do it. But the dog already understands, so the owner can be a little sloppy and uncoordinated with the dog's like, I've seen this picture 1,000 times. I know what's expected of me here, right? And so you can still you can still solve that problem. You can still sort of crack that nut, even if the dog's not displaying the behavior,
Bingo.
necessarily. And it's also an opportunity just to get really creative as well, as far as how we might be able to set things up, especially with technology these days, right? People can videotape, people can
Yeah.
do, you can literally do like a FaceTime call and be standing outside and see how the dog behaves and walk them through things and give them real-time feedback and troubleshoot, right? Like, there's a lot of ways to solve this problem. So yeah, I do see that problem a lot. I see it particularly in board and trains, but also even in private lessons where,
Yeah.
the trainer's confidence in their own handling, like even in the lesson, the dog's like, I'm not going to do this because you're here.
Yeah.
And so I go, that's fine. But what is the owner going to have to do when you leave?
Yeah.
Still show them how to do that. Still walk them through those steps. Let them get comfortable with the movements, the timing, etc. And then ask them to shoot some video, you know, that evening after you leave, the first time they try it, and send you the video so you can see what's going on.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it's something that really helped me to improve on those skills is when I started doing a lot of virtual coaching with other clients around the country and the world, because you can't just jump in and get the dog under control. And I think that's a big thing that people will do in the middle of lessons, in the middle of board and train follow-ups and stuff like that, is when the dog's struggling, they'll take the dog from the client, they'll get the situation under control, then they'll give the dog back to the client. And then, of course, the dog is going to be great because you just essentially fixed the problem for them, but you didn't teach the client the valuable skills that they need of, like, when the dog isn't listening to them, here are the adjustments you need to make in your handling. So I'll even do this with my trainers at the shop where if they're struggling with a particular client, I'll tell them, like, hey, in this next follow-up session you do, or this next one-on-one that you do not touch the dog one time, right? You have to be able to articulate to the client what they're doing wrong so they can learn from what they're doing wrong. And I think that that's probably, and that's a reason why with board and trains in particular, I think we see a lot of these types of problems is because you have such a history of success of, like, working with the dog, right? But not coaching the owner through things enough. But yeah, like videos and stuff like that, like doing FaceTime lessons and stuff we do all the time, because you just get to see, like, hey, like, here are the mistakes you're making. Like, you can't proactively coach the client through changing things before they even make the mistakes, which is even another thing that I see from an execution standpoint is they'll go into a lesson and it's like before they even let the client make the mistakes, they're already pre-telling them what to do. That way you never see what they're doing in the real world when you're not there.
So yeah, I mean, I think, all three of these areas are, I think, challenging in their own regard, right?
Sure.
I do agree that I think, like, the execution phase, man, you can get so technical there as well, right? So, like, yes, you've got this challenge, right? This just normal difficulty as dog trainers of the dog behaves differently with me than they do with the client. I think, one aspect of that is, yes, we can use technology, we can video record, et cetera. The other aspect, though, is also understanding about yourself. Like, what are the little things that I'm doing that are actually making this dog respond to me this way?
Yeah.
Right? Like, is it a difference, like, that when I turn and face the dog, that my shoulders are a little bit more squared off, whereas the client is holding theirs at an angle? Like, I find that a lot of dog trainers don't know what to actually coach the client through because they don't actually know the little things that they're doing themselves. Like, I like to talk about proofing against yourself, right? So a lot of times in a board and train, I'll see, my own trainers would do this all the time, where, like, every time they walk up to, tell the dog to go to place, they kind of walk up in the same way, then they stop. The leash is always in the exact same hand, kind of held in the same way.
Yeah.
They're sort of facing the same way in relation to the dog. And they don't realize these little idiosyncrasies that we all have. Like, some of them, like, walk a little bit different when they're, like, training a dog than when they walk normal. But it's like, but the client's not going to walk like that. The client's not going to always hold the leash there or always turn and face the dog in this situation. So we have to think about, like, what are these little things that I'm doing? And either A, once I'm aware of them, make sure that I'm teaching those little things to the client. Like, if I always take one step forward when I say place, I can't tell the client that the command is just place. I have to tell them it's take one step forward and say place.
The visual picture.
Or I have to at some point proof against that stuff, right? I have to sort of generalize against it where the dog learns, like, whether or not I take that step forward, it's the word that matters. Mm-hmm. And I have to be aware of those things. But all of that begins with sort of an awareness of ourselves. Again, I think video is super helpful here. Like, I talk a lot about how I think a lot of my progression as a trainer was because I was video recording myself for YouTube like really early in my career, and I had to like edit all those videos and watch them back, and you just notice things,
Yeah.
right? So you'll notice things that you want to correct, but you also just you'll be very familiar with what it looks like from the outside when you do it, and then when you see the client do it, you'll notice things that's like, oh, but it's different when I'm doing it. I'm turned this way, they're turned that way, or I'm holding the leash like this, they're holding it like that. But if you don't ever look at yourself from the outside, you might not even be aware of those, differences.
Yeah. How much weight do you put in, like you're mentioning, using the place command as an example of like walking towards it and like having the visual picture in addition to the verbal command, obviously. How much weight do you put into like getting the client to like obviously just meet you halfway with having a concrete routine of when they ask something or do something, there is kind of this visual picture behind it that helps the dog to kind of even further understand what it is that we want them to do versus just further generalizing all of those gazillion different pictures of an individual command like that.
Are you basically asking like how important is it for me that the dog responds to like just the word
Yeah.
versus like do we sort of build in like, yeah, it's totally okay if you like lean in and like point your hand to help the dog out, right?
Yeah. Yeah, kind of.
So like for me, like I don't really care. Like every dog trainer is a little bit differently here, and like I don't personally care. What matters to me is that you know what you're doing.
Yes.
And then you teach that to the customer, right?
That's,
so I see a lot of dog trainers that like they themselves might always kind of move a certain way or whatever, and the dog gets kind of used to that, but then they tell the client like, hey, like, yeah, just say place. And the client's back at home like sitting in their lazy boy saying place. Meanwhile, the trainer never once said place while they were sitting in a chair.
Yeah.
Right. And so whatever you're doing, just make sure you're aware of it and tell it to the owner so the owner can do the same thing. Whether you want that to be that you condition the dog, that you can stand still like a pencil and say place and the dog goes, like, cool. I used to like doing that. And then at some point I was kind of like, this actually isn't that important for my customers. So I'm going to loosen it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And I liked, having them use their body because I want them to, like, I think the lesson of like learning how to use your body effectively sort of overshadows this individual command of place. Like dogs respond, like, body language is their language. And when you can learn how to use your body intentionally to help communicate with your dog, I think that's going to bear fruit in a lot of different areas of their life, not just that one specific command, right? And so I kind of started leaning away from you must stand still, give the command, the dog must, respond to just the word, to like, no, like, let's learn how, like, how do I have to move to like have the dog go, oh, I think I know what you mean.
Yeah, that's a really,
you know what I mean?
That's a really great way of pointing it. Because I hear things like that, and one of my big things I put a lot of weight into with my clients is like routines, right? I think like obviously dogs are creatures of habit, and like the more consistent and predictable we can make scenarios, the easier it's going to be for them to be successful. And especially when you look at proofing things later on and using aversives and stuff like that, like I want to make things as fair as possible, where the dog just knows. I have the highest probability that it's not a generalization issue and they know what to do, right? And a lot of that comes from I'll create, like whether it's how a client sends their dog to place when they have a guest come over the house, or how they start their walk, or how they enforce A, B, C, or D thing, do the dog's nails, like any of that kind of stuff. I'll like break down an exact like step-by-step bullet point, like do this, then this, then this, then this, then this, and kind of build in those routines into, their day-to-day. So it's like if they're having problems, they could literally reference back to this list and be like, are you following these steps in the proper sequence? Which step is it that the dog's getting thrown off on? And then from there, if they're getting thrown off on it, like, hey, what are you doing incorrect in that step that we could adjust for it? And obviously it sounds really tedious of like, God, like you got to have all these bullet point steps. But getting back to your point, like you have to be mindful as a trainer of like why you're asking the things you're asking out of your clients, out of the dogs, and make it as easy as possible for them to succeed. So that's something that's always been really, really important to me, is just like concrete routines and just like really understanding not just this mishmash of stuff, but like a sequence of things. So
while you were talking, I was sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, oh my God, like this sounds like Mariano, because he's so like Mariano's so organized, and like that idea of like having these bullet points, like what is this sequence? Like how is this going to work out? Like it just sounded like something that Mariano would say. Then I look up and I see Mariano in his camera, and he's just nodding his head. Yeah. And I was like, this is his thing. Yeah. So I'm curious, Mariano, what's your process, I guess, for that conversation about like when you're teaching something, whether it's place or down or come, right? Like, is it about like the movement? Do you bring that in? Is there like a larger pattern that that command is sort of part of, like before you even give the place, like take 3 steps forward? I mean, I'm not, like not necessarily that specific, but like,
Yeah.
because you actually work with dogs now. Like like I haven't trained a dog to do a place command in a really long time. I work with dog trainers.
Yeah, I would say I'm learning that you have to bring in movement because from a trainer's perspective, I think both of you guys mentioned this already. Your expectations, which may be irrelevant to the owner, can absolutely get in your way, and your staff's expectations and so forth. And so, just from a teacher's perspective, I do like a dog that I can stand still and say place and they know where to go. It's nice, right? It shows clear understanding and comprehension and so forth. But for owners, Tyler said something to the effect of body language is dog's language, which is of course 100% correct. But I would also argue body language is people language. I mean, they say that 80 to 90 something percent of our communication is nonverbal, and I find that owners can analytically understand place means dog go here. But when you not only like allow them, quote unquote, because some trainers maybe don't, but encourage them, get up, point, and walk over there, owners understand better as well. Mm-hmm. I think for the same reason, there's a word for this that I forget, but I think it's also the same reason that our reward markers are good words, like yes, good, and no is no, because there's an innate attachment to the word itself, right? And I think that that's also why a lot of people who do sport and different things train dogs in languages that they don't necessarily speak. There's a kind of level of separation that allows them to be very like meticulous and kind of emotionally just, unattached, if that's the way to put it. But for owners, that attachment obviously is going to be there, and it's not bad. You just have to make sure that it's attaching in all the right places and not attaching in all the wrong places. And for some people, they need to move, like need to move. And for the overachievers, which I'm sure we all have or had, in clients who want to do like, okay, Tyler, what's your advanced program now, and what's your next level now? Then you can teach them like, I want you to be able to sit in your lazy boy and point to the. But dog training 101, which is way too often overly convoluted by trainers everywhere, is learn how to communicate with your dog in a way that they understand, right? Mm-hmm. If I have to go, hey, can you get me another one of these, please? There's nothing wrong with that, right? And if I have to tell the dog, hey, what are you doing? Come here. Go to your crate. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Now, in the training process, I totally get it. I try to proof against things as well, right? And sometimes I'll kind of purposely set a dog up that way. Like I'll very consciously, I'm going to pick up the leash like this, and I'm going to stand like this, and I'm going to walk away and then wait 2 seconds before I go break, right? And then I'm going to purposely do that for like a day, and then tomorrow I'm going to do none of that shit. Or every time I do that and walk away and then face the dog and wait 2 seconds, I'm going to go, good boy. And the dog anticipates place or whatever, right? Like there's tons of ways to proof against yourself, but I don't make owners do a ton of that. I just want to make sure that the dog is clear enough under, enough variations of context and so forth that I'm confident, you're confident in the place command. That's really what training is the dog's good enough at it that they can make certain inferences because they're going to have to in the real world, right? Even if we have the owners there all the time with us and all this other stuff, there's still people that are going to come to your home that don't come to my facility. There's still people, the contexts are going to change, right? So to kind of sum that up, I would say in the actual training, yeah, you want to make sure that dogs are very well versed in their understandings. But when you're teaching owners, I like to kind of make them move because they tend to vibe with it better. Even if they don't necessarily know it, they work better when they're moving while they're saying things.
Mm-hmm. I want to even take this even another level deeper because as you were talking and as Tyler asked the question of like for you of like when you're working with your clients and stuff, what is your sequence of how you'll kind of instruct them through? And the two things that I wrote down right off the rip is like in order to answer that question, I would also need to answer the questions of like, where do they need it? And is it even necessary in the first place? Which ties into another mistake I see in the North Star of dog training, which is we get owners like mindlessly doing obedience training all the time, where it's like they're asking dogs to like sit down, lay on their place, come, like do all of these different things in scenarios where it's just like absolutely not even necessary in that moment. And then it's like, the more you're asking your dog to do things, the more you have to be in a position to enforce it, the less probable you're going to be in a position to enforce it. The more you dilute your training, the further you kind of cycle down that rabbit hole of clients not being as successful as we want them to be. Where, you know, one of my big North Stars as we're working towards like behavioral modification training goals with clients is like, the more we're needing to micromanage them with obedience commands in the first place, it's like the less we're getting close to actually solving the goal that they're hiring us for in the first place.
I think if you were to ask the average person, like, what would you prefer to have? Like a dog that sometimes misbehaves, but listens to every command you give, so you can kind of like direct it away, or a dog that doesn't really listen to many commands, but generally behaves themselves.
Yeah.
And most owners would be like, yeah, I just want a dog that generally behaves themselves. Like they don't want to give a million commands. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head too with, you know, we have people doing all these routines that don't really matter. Again, that goes back to like, are you actually making more work for yourself as a trainer? But the flip side of that coin is, I think a lot of dog trainers, they think they're doing the dog owner a favor. Mm-hmm. So like that person comes in, they're like, yeah, my dog's leash reactive. And they go, cool, we're going to deal with the leash reactivity and full off leash obedience because we're using an e-collar anyway. So we're going to do all 5 commands fully off leash. And it's like, the owner's like, okay, fine, but I would have paid you just to fix the reactivity. Like that's what I wanted. But then the other piece of that is people have only so much time, energy, and interest in training dogs. And so you're not actually doing them a favor. You're not giving them something like, hey, this is a bonus for you. What you're actually giving them is a burden. Mm-hmm. Because now they spent all this money on all these commands that they never even asked for. And now they kind of feel obligated to practice them. But what inevitably happens, because it's too much, is that 1 or 2 of them start to slip through the cracks. And then the owner starts to feel down on themselves. And it can actually lead into them even not practicing the things that do really matter. Yeah. Also because we haven't distinguished for them those pieces of the puzzle that do really matter. And then the last piece of that I want to say is, especially in something like a board and train, where a lot of times we as dog trainers will only have like an initial 2 hours, like when we send that dog home. And now we've taught the dog like all these 5 commands, and we kind of feel obligated. We got to show the owner how to use the remote collar and how to use it with each of these 5 commands. And then by the time we get to like, okay, now we're ready to go and do some pass-bys with dogs, it's like you've got 20 minutes left in your lesson.
Yep.
And it's just like, how much more productive would that lesson have been if you spent 90 minutes of it doing pass-bys with dogs, because you didn't actually have to go over all this other stuff that nobody asked for anyway.
Yep. I have a oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm done.
I was going to say, I have a strict thing that I've been doing in my send home lessons, like as of the last like year or so, where I'll literally only pick 1 or 2 things to work on in the send home. It's like you have all these things you've worked on over the course of the dog's time with you, and it gets easy to want to go over and show the client all of them. But then it's like you're just demonstrating stuff to them, but they don't have anything to take and work with, you know? Where if I could pick one thing, like what's again your biggest pain point or your biggest North Star, and I could show you, hey, do these things this next week for that specific thing, and you're going to see some results for it, and then we'll get into the other stuff later. No big deal. You know what I mean?
You know, I think if you like combine that idea of pain point with also the idea of like just, okay, and then what's the fewest number of things that I could teach the owner that would give them a high probability of resolving that pain point. And always trying to get it, what are the fewest things? Not like, well, this would also be helpful and this would also be helpful. No. But what are the ones, if you could only do 2 or 3 of them, what are the ones that really matter? Yes. Focus on those, not just at the go home, but I would say throughout the entire board and train. Like get the dog really good at those things.
Yeah. And the other thing too, to the point of you said of like you thinking you're doing your clients a favor by teaching all these extra things. Like I know I've experienced this early on in my training career, and I'm sure many other trainers that are listening to this have as well, where you're working, let's say the client brings in for leash reactivity, right? And it's like you fix the leash reactivity within the first couple of sessions, then you got all these extra sessions and you want to get into the off leash and this and that. And even if the client doesn't want it, then you start those things and you run into some type of big hurdle, right? And then the client and the dog start just like failing at this unnecessary thing that they don't even give a shit about. And then it's like the client was so stoked because you fixed the problem after the first couple sessions, but now they forget about all of that because now in their mind, their dog is not being successful anymore. Right. And it just kills all their motivation. And then the client starts, not wanting to come back to the sessions because of it and things like that. And it's like, you should have just left good at good. You know what I mean?
You got to do the George Costanza, man. You got to leave on the high note.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So that's definitely something else that I see a lot with clients. But
You know,
yeah,
I feel like so like throughout this entire podcast, I think like all three of us keep saying like, you know, this thing I see dog trainers do. I feel like it sounds like we're like crapping on dog
yeah,
trainers,
sure.
but like, you know, one thing I really want to stress is, man, like the trainers that I like, you know, get to work with are actually really awesome, right? So
Yeah.
like this is why like I love like these kind of topics, right? Because when people are already doing a knockout job, you're not going to like really improve your outcomes as a trainer by like, oh, there's this missing dog training technique that I don't know. Like
Yeah.
the whole point of this is that actually like most of the newer dog trainers these days are actually coming up really strong from a like skill standpoint.
Hmm.
You know, there's just a lot of great information out there for them to learn. And so the reason that I think it's so important to talk about these topics is that like if we're going to move the needle, we have to go into these unexplored areas. But
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like we're like, oh, dog trainers these
Absolutely
days.
not.
Like I don't want to sound like that like curmudgeony old dog trainer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like a lot of all of our business is like helping those dog trainers improve these things because we want like our North Star as dog trainers is just being able to help more clients, right? And it's like it's
Exactly.
unfortunate when we see these situations that are holding other trainers back from helping the clients as best as possible, and that's all that we want, right? So you mentioned something a second ago that I'm interested in because I just had this conversation with somebody else on my podcast 2 episodes ago. So all these things we're talking about that are the big things that are like the roadblocks between success of your client, so few of them have to do with how you're actually training the dog, right? And so few of them have to do with you learning, as you just said, like that new dog training technique out there that helps the dogs learn this better or this or that, right? It really is how you're setting things up, your pregame, your plan program, and your execution of things, if you will, right? How much weight do you put in continued dog training education with that in mind? Because I struggle with this personally, where I'm like, all of my mentality at this stage in the game goes into how do I help my clients better? And like I said, most of that comes with how I'm communicating to them and how I'm setting up programs for them. So like I even myself find myself like not reading new dog training books or going through new dog training programs or this or that, like hardly at all these days. Like I'll kind of keep a little bit of a finger on things, but like I wonder like how much do you put weight in that and how important that is for trainers when you're working with them?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting question. So I'll take it from two angles. So on one side of it, again, I think this really depends on how much experience and knowledge that you have, right? So somebody in your position right now, like you've been around for a while, right? So there's not a lot that you haven't seen
Yeah.
at this point. Um, for somebody who's only been training dogs for 2 years, that's different. They should still be
Yeah.
absolutely still learning about dog behavior. Abs 100% still studying up, right? Um, but I think even from the more experienced dog trainer standpoint, I'll kind of take a different take on this, where a lot of trainers come to me to work with me for coaching, who are really feeling burnout.
Yeah.
Like they're really not loving where like their day-to-day work life is going. You know, not that they're not successful. Some of them are actually making great money. Like they've expanded into facilities. Things are going great on that end. They're just not happy. Like they're not feeling it. They kind of lost that fire in their belly. And one of my big piece of it, like I always tell people, you know, when I would go through that, which I did, like I did go through that, the number one thing that would kick up my motivation is learning something new about dog behavior. And it would make me excited to come in and like, hey, how can I, you know, like see this now in real life? Whatever, like sometimes it's not even a technique. It might have just been I read a cool study on associative learning that sparked some idea. Like, I wonder if I can see that in action. And it would make me want to come in the next day to work and like kind of creatively build those things into my training. And I want to see the outcomes and see what it changes and what makes it different. And it kind of just like sparks this fire in me. And so I think from that standpoint, I put the emphasis on continued education. Like even for somebody with experience, I think it keeps you like kind of in it for the right reasons, you know?
That makes sense.
And I like that a lot. But like it may not be that you're doing it because you think it's like, oh my God, this is going to make a huge difference in the success I'm getting with, you know, human aggressive cases. It's just like, no, this is just I want to always have that sort of fire in my belly. I always want to be interested in dog training, and I'm not feeling that right now. Like I'm kind of feeling like work is like drudgery, and I
Yeah.
need something to make me excited to come to work again.
I think that's a
I,
really great way to say that. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
I would add something to that too. I would say that it's some people have the ability to learn a new skill, say on their off time, and then go to work the next day and implement it in real time and learn how to make those connections as they go. And some people don't. And I think that for those who don't, or it's just easier not to type thing, I'm learning at this point in my career the value of taking sabbaticals. You know, a little bit of time off. It can be a week, 2 weeks. And I don't mean like a vacation, though those are obviously important too. I'm talking, I'm not dealing with clients right now, but I'm going to take a week, 2 weeks because I just purchased this person's program and I'm going to watch it front to back and take my notes. And I'm just going to be a student for this amount of time and try to properly digest this information and maybe spend a little of the time seeing where I can modify my systems of teaching and you know, and so forth to implement some of this stuff. But if it's hard to do while you're at it, then that's another option as well. And for a lot of these dog trainers that are, to Tyler's point, like financially you're doing well, maybe even a break would do you some good type thing. That remains another option. And there's a lot of dog trainers out there who, you know, this is kind of outside of the purview a little bit, but there's another element to planning, which is just your schedule. Like, for example, I've got some friends that do mostly boarding and training programs, and they're mostly longer, like 8, 10 week, like long board and train programs. But they book them in such a way that they take on, you know, X many dogs all at once and then take a week off before they take on X many more dogs again, right? And so they always have this like off week every, you know, 8 to 10 weeks, right? And little things like that give you opportunity if you want to learn new skills to kind of sit down and do that properly. Because I'm one of those that I'll listen to like an audiobook or something and I can ingest information on the go and I'll get a lot of it too, right? Like if we're talking 80/20, you know, I can listen to it at the gym and retain a decent amount. But if I get to sit down and read it, even if I'm also listening, but I get to sit down and read it and not worry about anything else, I get it better. And so I'm at that point now where taking a little break, and if a sabbatical is not super realistic, even structuring your week, not necessarily your day, because I'm not one of those that's like from 4 to 5, I can study, and then from 5 to 6, I can do X. I can't task switch like that. But what I can do is, you know, days 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the work week, lessons, you know, training staff, whatever. Day 5, I'm here if you guys need me, but I'm focusing on what I'm focusing on. And I'll take a whole day or most of the day, you know, 5, 6 hours and kind of digest this stuff. And it's purposely on day 5 because then I have all weekend to further digest. You know what I mean? So that would be the only thing I'd want to add to that is sabbaticals are really helpful when you're trying to learn new skills and implement new skills so that you don't feel pressured to force it into your system.
Yeah.
You know, some people try to make sense when it doesn't have to be there. And I've seen that make lessons longer all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely, not necessarily from like a learning new skill standpoint, but like anytime my wife and I travel for longer than a week, like that is a surefire way to like charge me up to like come back and start getting shit done again for sure. So I couldn't recommend that more either. Obviously, you got to balance it. Obviously, you don't want to be that guy that's like, oh well, I need my time off all the time in order to like get my job done. But like definitely,
Right.
if you're lacking some motivation, taking some time off from it and just like letting yourself just like just breathe for a minute, just like think on stuff and ponder and stuff, is so important for sure. I completely agree with that. So
And I would add one more thing. Sorry,
Yeah, no, go ahead.
because what you just said there was like, you know, if you're the kind of person that this, or if you're the kind of person that that. The reality is most people don't even know what kind of those people they are.
Sure.
And so when you're, you know, when you're talking about things like asking the right questions and what tiny steps do I break down, and am I even aware that this is a step that I even take? And that's why I don't make it obvious to clients then.
Yep.
I hold food different than you because I don't even think to bring that up to that level of detail. For people in and of themselves, that's a sort of pre-skill. Something that we've been kind of playing with is like this idea of step 0, like the skill before the skill, right? And one of the pre-skills is learning how to find out what type of learner you are, right? Do you need time like that, or do you like the pressure, right? Like Brent and I probably fall in line real similarly in a lot of ways, and this is kind of one of them. I think why we got along so well, just historically, even when I lived in LA and we were working together in person in a facility, is we both like pressure, or at least we both can perform well under pressure. I'm learning to like it. I can still perform well, but I'm learning to like my time and my like peace. But when we were both at that age at that time, we were just like, sure, pressure, yeah. Oh, an extra dog than we thought, yeah, okay, whatever. An extra lesson than we thought, okay, whatever. And it just worked out that way because that sparks your like your creativity and your competitive edge too.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not one of those, because you'd be surprised how many people think that they're one of these, but they're really one of those, is immense. I would say like half, right? Lots of people have this conception of, I feel like I'm better at this. And so they'll do this when really they come across a lot better at that. But because they don't believe so, they'll continue to do the first one, being worse at it because the belief is that they're better at it, right? Mm-hmm. And the key to all this stuff is just a level of self-awareness, right? Like nothing crazy. You don't have to go like meditate in the Himalayas or anything, but it's good to kind of sit and ask yourself questions on a decently regular basis. And one of the reasons, Tyler was joking earlier that I'm really systemized is because I need to think like this because naturally I have huge blind spots in my own mind. Like I overlook things to do with myself. Like I legit am one of those that will forget to eat in a day because I'm just too busy, right? And then I'll sit down and like, oh shit, my hands are shaking. I'm hungry, right? So I have to kind of sit and systemize things and I'll ask myself questions in the form of questions like, why do you do this the way you do it? Question mark. And then I'll answer it like an answer. And so sitting down and making time to do things like this, as crazy as that may sound to people, to normal people, it's very helpful sometimes. And you don't have to do it like every day. It doesn't have to be this daunting, task in itself with all this upkeep like dog training can be. Just when you have some time, if you feel that there's a question that you can't quite find an answer to, literally write it out. And then start breaking it down into sub questions if that's helpful to you. Like, well, why do I feel this way? And when did I start feeling this way? And so forth, right? And the answers that you come up with on paper might help you start to formulate what type of learner you are. And then that would be the step 0 to be like, do I take sabbaticals or do I just kind of roll with the punches?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I guess to kind of put that into a simple term, if you will, one thing that we do a lot as a company is we try to put a magnifying glass on hurdles or hiccups, right? And we'll try to like anticipate them before they happen or when they happen, obviously. And I think as dog trainers or as newer business owners in dog training or whatever field you're in, sometimes we kind of just we kind of just say, oh, hiccups and hurdles are a part of the process. So like when they happen, you don't think twice on them and you just kind of work through it and whatever, PR the situation, damage control the situation, just do whatever you need to do to get past it, obviously. And then you move on, right? And you never ask yourself the question with that magnifying glass on the hurdle of, is this something that could be prevented moving forward? Right? Is there a reason why this happened in the first place? And then, there are going to be some circumstances where there's not, you know what I mean? It's just, it's a part of the process, whatever. Dog learned a certain way, or there's something happened with the client or this or that. But I would tell you that most of the time when we've run into a hurdle and we've looked at why did this happen, there's almost always something that we could adjust or change moving forward to decrease the probability that that's going to happen again. And I think if people start being just the whole point of this podcast that I'm getting is just be intentional about stuff, right? Be aware and be intentional about things. You're gonna make your life easier. You're gonna make your training business more successful. You're gonna make your clients more successful. You're gonna make your training more efficient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you've got to put a magnifying glass on some of this stuff and start asking these questions as you keep mentioning.
And trainers don't even necessarily know how to do that.
Yeah.
I fixate on that so much because me, like,
I would just say like people don't.
Yeah, people in general.
Do that. Like not necessarily dog trainers. Just people. Yeah.
Yeah, fair point. So like, and the reason I focus on that just so much, because I know I keep saying that, is me as I listen to podcasts all the time, like dog training related or not. And I just get so fascinated with someone said something and I'm like, I know that that's important and I know that that's valuable and I know that I should implement that, but I have no idea how.
Yeah.
So this is going to sit in my memory bank and be like, that was really good advice that I'm never going to use because I don't know how to use it. Right. And so it sparks my creativity of like, how do I take this advice and make it useful? And if I can't do that myself, I just don't have enough info. How do I do what I do know how to do? Who was this guest? Looked up their name. Where can I find them? How can I contact them? Just how do I take actionable steps to get good at pieces of advice that I know are good for me, but I don't know how or why yet.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, I think, one thing like what you were saying, David, about looking at all this stuff through a magnifying glass. I mean, basically what you're talking about is having some kind of a process for self-review and reflection.
Yep.
Whatever that process may be. But actually, like, having a process, like having that moment where you check in. So like for your team, you have this like self-review of the company, right? The company itself, like you're going to sit down, hey, we had this hurdle, let's sit down and talk about it. And you can see how productive that is. But we have things in our personal lives as people and as business owners and dog trainers, et cetera, that it's not a conversation with anybody else, but we still need to be having those same conversations.
Yeah.
Right. And so what might that look like? I mean, that could look like, I mentioned before how I used to videotape myself a lot. Right. And then I had to watch that back. Now, I wasn't intentionally doing self-review. I was intentionally trying to make YouTube videos. But I often recommend these days that trainers at least once a week, if they're if it's in their current goals to improve their actual dog training like execution, right? If that's something that's important to them right now, at least once a week, video yourself, doing a session with a board and trained dog, and then make time to watch it back. Or maybe you're trying to get better at your lessons with clients. Maybe you tend to go overtime and you want to keep that down. At least once a week, record one of your lessons and then make sure you watch it back. You're going to see things when you're looking at it from the outside that you don't notice when you're in the moment. But that self-review could also just look like giving yourself at least a little bit of time in your life, whether this is about your business or anything else, to just pause, think about that day. But for me, it's really important to not just think about it. So I want to think about it and I want to say, what from today, if there was anything, sometimes there's not, is there anything from today that was significant that I want to make sure, maybe there was a lesson there that right now, like I'm thinking about it, I thought about it today, but I know if I don't write it down, for instance, a week from now, I'm going to forget that this even happened, right? So for me, that's all journaling is. It's sort of like a mental dump of like, was there anything from today that I want to make sure I carry forward into the future that I don't just forget and it just falls into the ether? And again, it could be something really great that happened, but a lot of times it's like a lesson. It's like a reminder for myself. I'm kind of critical in my journal in that way, but I'm sort of like, I just sort of like, hey, remember, don't let yourself do blah, 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 or remember, be better at blah, blah, but having that moment of either I'm watching myself or I'm just thinking about the day. It could be anything, any way of like reviewing yourself. And then actually like put pen to paper somewhere or type somewhere, like articulate those thoughts. If you're like, just like if you were in that meeting, right? Like somebody's probably taking notes in the meeting. You're having this conversation, but if nobody writes it down, like it just sort of gets lost. So somebody's writing down, what are the key takeaways here? Is there anything that we want to change moving forward as we approach, clients like this or whatever? If nobody writes that down in that meeting, that meeting is basically completely unproductive.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's the same thing with like self-review. I think a lot of people like they'll lay in bed like ruminating about things. They go, well, I kind of do self-review when I'm laying in bed, but it's like, but if you don't articulate it, it's just this chaos of thoughts until you actually try to articulate it into like form, into actual sentences. And that's what's going to also help to carry it forward in your life. But you also have this thing that you can look back on, whether it's a paper journal or a note in your phone or whatever. Yep. So for me, that's kind of part of that like magnifying glass. Whatever I'm doing, how am I sort of recording my own behavior or my own process or whatever?
Yep.
And then am I ever looking at it? Maybe I don't have a specific question in mind when I'm looking at it, but looking at it might give me questions, things I want to look into more. But maybe I'm going in because I do have a question about like, hey, I wonder if, like to go back on a previous example, I wonder if the reason I'm going overtime in my lessons is because sometimes I let my clients like ask an unrelated question and then I go off on a tangent. So once a week, I'm going to record myself doing a lesson and I'm actually going to like track how much time, if somebody asks a question that has nothing to do with what we're doing, how long are my responses?
Yeah, that's a
and actually
good
keep
one.
Like I guarantee you that if you do that, you will improve.
Yeah,
I guarantee there's no way you're going to record those times and then not go into your next lesson mindful of when that client asked that question. And then you could take it a step further and do something like, okay, let me write out. So I'm not in that moment. Let me just write out ahead of time. When somebody asks an unrelated questions, what's maybe one or two ways that I can politely just divert the question, say, hey, we can get to that, when we have time, but right now we got to stay on task for XYZ. But let me think about how I want to say that, write down a couple of few different options for myself so that in that moment I'm not trying to come up with it like right then and there. You know what I mean? But I'm like putting it down, having those questions to answer. There's a lot of ways you can go about this, but I guarantee you that if you start actually sort of monitoring your own behavior in some way, it's going to improve the things that you want to improve upon once you start monitoring it. It's like, you know, keeping logs at the gym of like how many reps you do of an exercise. Like there's something about that that just makes you want to push for that extra rep.
Yo, I'm cracking up right now because I got like 2 clients I'm working with right now that are like so fucking hard to keep on track with stuff. Like,
Oh, it happens all the time, man. It happens all the time.
oh my
But
God.
I talk
Yeah.
to so many dog trainers that will literally, like, once they start recording, they're like, yeah, like I went off on that question for 27 minutes.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
like,
literally.
of an hour long lesson, you
Yeah.
just wasted a half of your lesson on something that doesn't matter. That's why your lessons are going 90 minutes when they're supposed to be an hour, you know? And so
Yeah.
they start being way more aware of it. And it's painful for them to watch back. So it also gives that extra motivation when the client asks that they're like, I don't want to have to watch myself back doing that again. So the next time a client asks a question like that, they're like, you know, that's a great question. I think we'll get to it at the end of the lesson. If we have time, it depends on how good you do with this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like whatever it is you decided you were going to say, you know.
Well,
Um,
and something that I find to be very true that Brent's super passionate about. So I'm glad this came up because I can kind of mention this for him is when you get into the habit of sort of politely interrupting somebody's thought process and just keeping them back on task and putting rails on the lesson. Like, no, we're going to do this, this, and this. I'm sorry, that falls on the other property. We're going to do that next time type thing. It does a lot, especially if you can be very polite, professional about it, to the framing of the relationship between the two of you, right?
Yeah.
I want to be polite and I want to be helpful and I want to answer your questions, but I'm the working professional who you're paying to do this job for you, and I can't do that if you're distracting me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you can manage to do that, and this may sound so funny, but not take their questions personal in a sense. Like a lot of people will be like, ah, shit, you asked this weird question. Now I would like to divert you. And they almost make you kind of the bad guy for putting me in this tough spot of having to divert you and hopefully not like offend you.
Yeah.
But over time you realize that they're just asking questions. They're just trying to get value. They're just trying to this, they're just trying to that. They're just trying to make this process as good for them as possible, which is why they're here in the first place. They just don't necessarily understand this isn't helping.
So I've got
So
a.
it becomes,
Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
no, sorry. So it becomes your job to let them know. You guys like focus on the process. You know, if it's a question that you're going to touch on, you know, I like to delineate like questions that are irrelevant or they're just irrelevant today, right? In a couple lessons time, this question is going to be great. So sometimes people don't realize they're going out of order because they don't know what the order is. They're not dog trainers. Or sometimes they'll ask a question that has nothing to do with the reason that they're there. And in either case, it's fun and it's good for the interaction between the two of you to be able to be like, oh, you know, let's focus on this first because this is really what's going to help you, right? This is why you're here, right? Or that other question you just asked, it makes total sense. Absolutely. Keep that in your pocket. Maybe write it down somewhere. I give people a workbook. They can take notes for exactly stuff like this, right? Put that under this page. We're going to talk about that on this page, right? And it's a really great way to keep things on track.
I've got a interesting perspective on this conversation as well, though, which is how many times have you experienced working with a client where that client is a chatty Cathy, we'll say, right? And they just want to talk to you to the moon and back, and you build this like unbelievably great relationship with the client on like a deeper level through chatting with them about this kind of stuff. And maybe you hit the end of the program and the training isn't quite where you want it to be, but the client is so thrilled to the moon and back with where things turned out because of how much they like you, because their dog did still improve with stuff, and it's still a massive victory. So I sometimes will, I joke, like I said, like one of them in particular I could think of right now is this way, where I've almost needed to make my training even more efficient than I feel like it already is, so I could accommodate for the 30 minutes of conversation that we're going to have within that lesson to build that relationship with these clients. You get what I'm saying?
I couldn't agree more for a couple reasons. Number one, by nature, I'm an asshole. So like I have to like teach myself to be good at interacting with people. And that sounds like a joke and it's not. And
yeah.
The second reason is my wife, McKenna, is a physical therapist. And so naturally she works mostly with really old people. And a lot of them go on a very regular basis. And she finds like the best part for them
Social
is just
hour.
talking to yeah, because
Yeah.
they don't go anywhere. They don't do anything. That they just got hip surgery or whatever, and they go to PT and they go home, and they go to PT and they go home. And so they're doing their exercises, and at home they're doing their exercises and so forth. But I do wonder that really often, and in my in my perspective, the way I look at things, it varies from client to client. Like, how much does our social interaction matter to you versus result
Yeah.
versus this other person?
It's you have to
And
weigh it in.
so, yeah, and I kind of keep this like sliding scale in my mind because I'm a psychopath, and so I'll kind of think of you know, I can tell you just really want to talk. We have a dog here right now. I don't want to like say too much, but
Sure.
this lady, super sweet lady, you know, she just kind of brought it up during our evaluation. Her husband just passed, and like all this other stuff is going on because her husband just passed, and she's got these other
Yes.
kids in high school, and my husband just passed, and you know, and her dog is like just a lab that's kind of energetic and like digs and pulls and you know, nothing crazy, but you can tell like she just wants to connect a little bit, right? And so in those moments, I'll lean very heavily on like, okay, let me explain this stuff to you nice and concise so that like we can talk about the fact that your husband just passed. I'm so sorry. How are you? Like, what's up? You know?
Yeah, yeah.
And then just try to make her laugh or whatever. Like just the normal human things that you would want to do for somebody like that, right? Because you don't want this whole pity party, right? But it does help to be concise enough to be able to get that out of the way.
Yeah.
And other people sometimes are like, just train my dog and shut the fuck up, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
if that's the case, then I'll be as brief as I can while being as firm as I can. Like, yeah, but you still have to listen to me here. I understand you just want me to train your dog, but this isn't an oil change. Like, I need you to know how to do this for ongoing maintenance, right?
Yeah.
But I'll try to step in and out of people's ways depending on how much they seem to want me to be there, right?
Yeah.
But it's this ongoing calculation that depends from person to person.
Yeah, and I'll kind of
I'll take it to the extreme actually. So like David, you were talking about how it's you know, when you know somebody really enjoys that social interaction, like you have to be even more efficient in your training
Yep.
so that you can leave time for that. But being more efficient in your training kind of implies that like the North Star here has anything to do with the training at all. And so my example is I had this client that I worked with that I loved this woman. I'm not going to name her name, but she was a little bit older. She was by herself, and she was ill, and she had too many dogs. And her dogs had some behavior problems, but she'd been around dogs her whole life. She was really good about managing her house. Like, so it was kind of chaotic, but she had crates. She had this whole house to herself. She had crates in different rooms. It wasn't like a hoarding thing. She had like 4 or 5 dogs.
Sure.
It was just, but they were active dogs, you know? And I did 27 private lessons with her, I want to say. And what I would actually specify even more so is that I did 27 first lessons with her. Like, we never really got past
Yeah.
the lesson 1 skill set. But what became very clear to me as we were working together is that's not why I was there.
Yep.
Like, she really enjoyed our time together. And like one day, like literally our entire lesson was she wanted me to help her order a muzzle for her dog. And she like was just having trouble with the website. And like, that's what we did. And then she like brought me something to drink. And like, that was like all she wanted to do that lesson. So it wasn't even about being efficient in my training. It was like, we're going to go through the motions of dog training. Like we'll go for a walk. We'll get 2 of the dogs out together in the backyard. And because like some of them couldn't be around each other, you know, we'll do like a little safe socialization with a couple of them. Like we'll do these things that kind of feel productive, but really like it wasn't about the end goal. We never got anywhere. And to be honest, I told her that at the outset. Like at the very beginning, I was like, you have, like, just very simply, you have too many dogs. Like this is a virtually impossible situation that you have here, just because given her health and her, you know, just everything, right? And like she kind of knew that going in, right? Like it just, there was no real end goal. She was like, yeah, but I still want to try. And I was like, okay, like I'll give you my best. But you know, she was a great lady.
I'll add one
27
more thing
lessons
to
later.
that.
Yeah.
I just want to add one more quick thing to that, which is I agree with what Tyler's saying and what David you're saying. And I would just say you just kind of have to be able to read what the intentions here are, because some people want the social time or they actually do want dog training, but the social time is also important. Like I do think you should like your dog trainer. Just the one thing I try to look out for is I want to make sure that I'm never the bottleneck myself. Like I'm talking so much that
This
we
is a
don't do
good
things that
point.
we should.
This is a good point.
But the other one is that I've seen trainers, and I've done this earlier in my career, where I get so friendly with a client that later when I need to hold them to it a little bit, it's harder to do. It feels like a friendship taboo. Like the relationship's kind of evolved a little. It's not just like I'm the working professional, you're here for me to do a job for you. It's more like, hi, how are you? I need you to stop talking and go now. And it feels strange to them all of a sudden. So if you are comfortable navigating those types of things,
Hmm.
then sure, right? Or some people who just want the social interaction and a little bit of not being aloneness, then great. But I would say it's definitely important to try to keep those things in mind because you absolutely can find yourself in a sticky situation.
Yeah. And it's there's such a balance to all of this, obviously, because like it needs to be authentic as well. You know what I mean? Like you can't force the friendliness and like try to just like put on your fucking friendly face. Like when we run into these clients, like we actually, you know, if you're jiving that well with them, like most of the time you're enjoying it too. You know what I mean? And you care about this individual and you care about the success of them. And listen, like it would be a different conversation if it's the chatty Cathy that has the dog that's like attacking and killing every family member that they own or something like that. Like obviously we need to take that much
100%.
more seriously, right? But with most of these people, it's like, you know, other circumstances you run into are like, you know, the client that has had a lot of their family and friends like borderline disown them because they have too many dogs, or you know what I mean? They're the weird dog person in the family, so nobody talks to them, they can't connect with anybody. So like them being able to build that connection with you, like is that important for them? It's like we joke we're dog trainers but therapists. Like how many dog trainers say that all the time? But it's like there is a degree of truth to that where you have to help these clients be able to like navigate some of the emotional hurdles that are in the way, and the only way you can do that is by letting them talk sometimes. And sometimes if you just let the client talk, they will also begin to expose pieces of information, getting back to the evaluation, that are absolutely essential for me understanding more deeply what's going on within the household. You know what I mean?
And a lot of
then,
it's inevitable too, because
yeah,
we're talking about finding pain points and alleviating them early. And
yeah,
when you do that, people feel good. And when people feel good, they talk.
yeah, yeah.
I have a client, they're actually going to be dropping their dog off for boarding over the 4th of July because he stresses out. So we're going to be chilling in the living room together. Is They got this dog, this pit bull that had been to this trainer, that trainer, everybody recommends euthanize him. And when I met them, the mom, I don't know how serious she was, but she was like, if this dog bites another person, I'm divorcing him type thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, even as a joke, that's not that funny, right? So, we take stuff like that super serious, and me and the dad, we got real close, And he's an older guy. We don't have like a ton in common, but the things we have in common, we have in common, likes cars and whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But absolutely, I get that point. Like you can, in fact, luckily, I'm in a position right now where the majority of our really good friends here in Arizona, if they're not from church, they're my former clients.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love my clients, and we all end up staying kind of really close and connected. But definitely, I mean, the point that I'm getting at is there are times where I totally feel like I'm not your guys' counselor, but I almost have to play a little bit of it for the sake of this dog or for the sake of, XYZ, because this dog, not only was it that big of a sticking point in the relationship, but
Mm-hmm.
the reason I thought of it when you said that about like kind of isolating is because of this dog, they hadn't seen their granddaughter because their kids wouldn't bring their kids over since they've had the dog, right?
Yep.
And that I think is why the wife was so upset. And now not only does he behave a bit better and is like way more predictable and so forth, but when they want a break, when they want to go visit their family, they just board him with us because we can handle him. He likes us. He trusts us. They know that nothing's going to happen. And so I do like being able to be that person for other people. Like, you can have a life again, right? Because I'll manage him for a week or two and you can go do your thing. And naturally it creates a bond that's not just client, right? Like I kind of joke here, like I'm not an asshole. I'm more of a computer. I'm like ChatGPT, right? I just think in like processes and but when the human relationship side comes out, it is really nice. And
Sure.
it is really cool to be the reason that you can tell someone gets to breathe a sigh of relief and just go and do fun things with their wife,
Yeah, and the last thing too with that is like if it's genuine and you really care about the individual, I think to your point of like some people can find themselves in sticky situations where then they need to like crack the hammer down. I think if it's genuine and the client can tell you really care about them, when you do need to get on them a little bit over something, you could make it not weird. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't want people to shy too far away from, building these deep relationships early on with their clients because they need to enforce stuff later on, but it's as
Absolutely.
we've said this a million times, it's just a balance with all of this.
Absolutely. It's a matter of skills, I think. It's a matter of interpersonal skills. And these are in my opinion anyway, these are the skills that most people, but since we're talking dog trainers, don't tend to focus on a ton. I'm not saying that dog trainers are particularly bad communicators. It's just for the amount of effort. Like if you were to take dog training as a job, 50% dog, 50% owner, dog trainers put 90% of their efforts in constantly improving the dog half, and they don't spend nearly enough improving the people half. And some of that is just analytical organizing and assessment skills, teaching skills, but a lot of it is just learn when to be quiet and let this person talk about how much they're really upset about XYZ, and learn when to politely or maybe a touch more abruptly stop them from what they're this tangent they're going on, and know how to artfully redirect them to something that's more productive, and knowing how to do it, David, to your point, in such a way that you're still on their team. That's kind of what I tell my trainers is owners will accept your like redirect, or or whatever you want to call it, right? A criticism or whatever you want to look at it, as long as you do it in such a way to where you make it obvious at all times. But I'm on your side. The reason I'm stopping you, the reason I'm telling you this was a mistake, is because I want you to win. You winning is me winning, right? And as long as you can convey that, owners tend to be okay with it. Like a coach, right? Like, you can be hard on me, I don't care. As long as my victory is your victory, then whatever. Tell me I'm being stupid, right?
I love it. All right, Tyler, I told you I was going to save my juiciest question for 139, but I'm going to give it at 133. Okay. So this isn't really that juicy of a question, but so I was listening to Michael Ellis was just on that like Yorkshire Canine Academy podcast recently, and there was a really interesting question that he asked him in it, which was like, have you had any like epiphany moments recently? Right. And I actually thought Michael's was very interesting, which is he's kind of starting to question some of the concepts of, operant conditioning and classical conditioning and things like that. And it was something that I wish they would have got deeper into, but regardless, I digress. Tyler, I'm curious, especially now that you are not so much in the game of actively training dogs anymore, what some of your more recent epiphany moments have been that are still somewhat related to the dog world.
So I don't know that I would call this an epiphany moment, but certainly like maybe like a validating moment, or really sort of like hammering a point home in a way. I think it's like anybody who's spent any time listening to me knows I've spent a good part of my career working on, again, being really efficient in my training. A lot of what we already talked about as far as, what don't I need to teach, right? What isn't important here? And so very recently, we got a new dog. So we lost Charlie, who was the only dog that we had at the time. He was an old man. We lost him over the winter, and we went a period with no dog, which was interesting. I haven't not had a dog in my house in like 20 years at least. And so, but basically my whole life, like I had like 6 months where I went off to college and then left that college where I was living in dorms where I didn't have a dog. When I left, the very first apartment I got by myself, I had an apartment with some friends for a few months. Before I moved in, I got a dog. Like I've literally just had dogs my entire adult life. So I didn't have a dog. And then we got this new dog, Abby. And Abby's great. She's 4 years old. She is I'm smiling here because everybody's kind of surprised when I say this. She's a Labradoodle Golden Doodle mix.
Bro, I have a mini Labradoodle now.
Dude, she's the best.
He's the best. I completely agree.
She's the best. Anyway, Charlie was a really cool dog too, and he was similar in this way. So when I got Charlie, I was still like a young dog trainer, like a lot of zest for training my dogs all the time and stuff like that. And so I taught Charlie everything and a lot of tricks. But like, as I became an adult and had kids and everything else, and sort of my priorities in life changed. Like at the end of the day, it was like, but what are the things I'm actually using with Charlie? And it was like, Charlie doesn't pull on leash, and he'll come when I call him, and he understands an e-collar so that if he doesn't come, like I can keep him safe. Mm-hmm. He didn't know place command. He didn't do a downstay. Like he didn't do any of these things because I just didn't need them. I brought him to the IACP conference one year and, just kept him on a slip lead, and he just would sit at my feet wherever. I didn't tell him sit. It's just, he just knew he was a well-behaved dog, right? Like we were talking about.
Yep.
And so, with Abby, it's kind of the same thing. Like we've had her for almost 2 months now. It was the weekend of Mother's Day when we got her, and I've worked on Come with her. She's doing very well with it. She's like moderately e-collar conditioned. I've been doing it sort of on and off. She knows a little bit of place, but just like positive reinforcement. She already walked really nice on a leash. More importantly, we've made sure she doesn't run out of doors. She's learned to drop because she had a habit of grabbing socks. We taught her to drop. We taught her kind of like just life skill stuff, kind of working on not jumping. But it's sort of the same thing. Like there's all these things that like the younger dog trainer Tyler would have if I was like a new client with a dog, I'd be like, teach all these things. But it's like, but I'm never going to use, like, they're not going to impact my day to day.
Yeah.
Like on a day to day basis, what do I need this dog to understand to make our life go really smooth? And some of those things are really non-conventional. They're just not conventional. Like they're not, it's not come heel, sit down, stay, but we can divert the same amount of attention to like, well, how are we going to teach the dog to, you know, not rush out a doorway, and let's make sure we do our reps just like we would with sit, and like we're just going to do that instead of this other thing. I don't care if the dog sits at the door. I just want her to not run out it right away when I open it. Like that's all I really need, right? Yeah, and so just like what are the things that now as a, you know, as a 42-year-old man with two kids, my son just graduated elementary school. Like it's so different. I had, look, this was the epiphany part. The other day I was outside with her and I was thinking back of like when I first started training dogs and I was 24 or something like that. And I would work with people with kids and like real careers, you know, and I'm telling them about all the stuff they need to be doing with their dog. And like, I had no perspective though on like what that life was actually like. And so now that I'm 42, like it's just a different world, you know. And I think just my perspective on like what is modern dog training, like from a pet dog standpoint, right? Specifically, right? What is modern dog training? Because again, so many of the things that we teach in dog training, maybe were important in like 1985 when like that dog training class was like sort of designed, but like are they all important now? And is doing all of those things taking away from something else that is more important in modern life and the way that people live their lives now with dogs and are much busier lifestyles, and you know, almost all these like two working adults in the family, like things are just really different now. You know, we live with our dogs really different now. And do we need to kind of rethink, like, again, is it always come heel sit down place, or is one of those is there something else that's sort of like a new need of the modern family that we're not thinking about really? Yep. That we should sort of like build into the mix, and just like what do people need? What do people need with that given dog for just the average day, for that day to go smooth? And it might not be a command, it might just be an understanding about the world, right? Mm-hmm. There's a thing that's going to happen every day that we want the dog to understand what it is and what our expectation is of them when it does happen, right? And that may or may not involve a command. It might just involve, don't do XYZ. Anything that falls under this purvey is fine, but now you know what to expect, right? Anyhow, that was my sort of epiphany. It was just like, it just kind of hit home with this new dog because like I've honestly done so little training with her. And she's a really great dog. And I just feel like she's not a performance dog. Like I got her for my kids. I got her as a family pet. And we're just keeping it so minimal. Like, what are we actually going to use? What do we actually need from her?
Yeah. That's so funny.
And I walk her on a long line and I let her sniff everything.
Yeah.
And she goes in front of me and behind me and crisscrosses. Like she doesn't heel. Because when I'm taking her out, it's not like my wife and I, like it'll be in the morning, it'll be a nice morning, and we'll say, hey, do you want to go for a walk this morning after the kids get on the bus? And we always go, is it just gonna be the two of us or are we taking Abby? Because sometimes we want to go on if I'm not going to work out that day, I might want to go on kind of a power walk and like really truck it. And like that's not Abby's vibe. So if I'm going to take Abby out, like maybe I need to take her with me when I walk too for some reason. But a lot of times it's like, is this walk for me or is it for her? And if it's for her, it's like, well, what does she want to do on the walk? And I'm not saying you should let your dog do whatever, but like she doesn't pull me. She doesn't bark at other dogs, right? She's behaving very well. So
why
hey,
does it matter?
if you're gonna do the things that are important to me, then like this walk is for you. If you want to stop and sniff every single tree, then like let's do it. And you know, we're not going to get very far, but and she's thrilled. She's loving life.
Yeah.
You know, so like, but like if I were my own client, I would have been making me heel.
Yeah.
At 24 years old,
yes.
When I was a 24-year-old dog trainer, I'd be like, you must heel, and it's like, I don't wanna.
Yeah, I don't want to. I literally just don't want to. Yeah.
That's my epiphany.
When you live with your dogs in a way, like when you live with your dogs, not like a dog trainer, you start realizing what clients actually want. And like, I don't know why.
And that's what it is.
For
As the non-dog trainer Tyler now, like I have a totally different perspective. I should have added, it's not just being 42 years old and having kids. It's also
You're
like
living
I'm not
like
in
a
constant
dog
dog training mode anymore.
Yes.
That's why I got a mini golden doodle, because like I'm not getting a dog. I used to have Malinois. That's a dog trainer's dog.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I have no business owning a Malinois right now. I got a mini golden doodle.
Yeah, but you know what's hilarious is I still live with my Malinois, like not a dog trainer. And it's like you start realizing, like the lack of importance of a lot of these types of things for your average client. So listen, I know you got to hop off here in a couple minutes. So I think that's a great place to wrap things up. I think we whipped together something pretty good, guys.
I think we did.
I think so. You know, so not too shabby.
I think there was that sort of blank pause in the moment. That was kind of on me. I was thinking to myself, I'm like, God, like I keep answering the questions and I'm not giving Mariano a chance to talk. And so then so I like
pausing to
next
try to
time
get
David
him to jump
stops
into
talking,
it.
I'm not gonna jump in. I want to make sure Mariano gets. So I didn't say anything. And then nobody said anything, and I was like, "Oh shit!" Maybe I was
thought you were thinking.
Maybe this
You know
was
what's
like the one time
hilarious?
I was supposed to say something.
In that pause, I too was like, "Did I say something really stupid and nobody has anything to say back to it?" I did think that right there.
I thought I was being chatty Cathy. I thought I was dominating, and I was like, "I'm being a dick. I'm not letting Mariano talk. I keep jumping right in."
You guys see what I
deliberately was like, "I'm not going to jump in now."
Yeah, too funny.
Well, Thank you very much, David, for having us on. For everyone listening, be sure to check us out. This is going to be Art of Teaching 2.0 now. It'll be live in Buffalo, New York, of course. However, we are also selling virtual tickets. We'll make sure that David has info so that you guys can find out more and purchase those tickets. But we'd love to see you there in person or online. Either way, it's going to be a blast. It's 3 days long. Make sure to bring your notepad with you. It's going to be a ton of fun. Tyler, Brent, and I are going to be doing our thing, and we hope to see you guys there.
Did you just hit play on a pre-recording? I think he just hit play on a pre-recording. Yeah, what the fuck? I was like, did I miss the cut screen where he inserted a video right there?
No, I don't.
That was incredible, man.
I have my outline of the whole thing here, but no, I just kind of shot that. I can freestyle like a mug. Tyler, you and I need to get together. I know you like hip hop. We can do our thing.
I remember you telling me that you like to freestyle when you came to Buffalo the first time. We were at the Anchor Bar eating chicken wings, and we were talking about who we like in the hip hop world.
Yeah,
you were telling me.
I'm dead serious.
Tell me tips on how you start freestyling. I can't freestyle, but I'll listen to you.
Well, if you try,
I'll put on some beats. I'll put on some beats.
There you go. Yeah, pick some beats. That'll be fun. That'll be fun. Anyway, I know you have to go. Thanks, David. Yeah, man, it's been a blast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having us on. Appreciate it, David.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you guys on. So we'll do it again next time when I know I'm having you guys on.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. I'll let you know when this goes live. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, man.
All right.
See you.